Right now there's a pandemic. They could vote by mail. People could do a lot of stuff online. No, let's make it harder.
Welcome back to Keep Austin Voting, a mini-series focused on how to vote and why it matters. I'm Kris. This is my co-host, Raasin Mcintosh, and today we have a very special guest, Diana. Tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I am currently the advocacy manager for a media organization called Progress Texas. But I first got involved in politics last year, a little bit over a year ago, working for Congressman Lloyd Doggett, who represents a portion of Austin, but also Hays County and also Bexar County, a huge part of Texas. And I'm also politically involved in Central Texas through different organizations, including the Austin Tejano Democrats. I'm on their board. And I co-founded an organization called La Politica, which is focused on trying to get young folks, primarily Latinas, civically engaged. And that was through my last job last year, working for Congressman Doggett, seeing that I was often the only woman of color in a lot of rooms where political decisions are being made.
That's awesome.
Wow. So could you expound a little bit on, I know we talked a little bit about before the show about congressional, what a congressional staffer actually is?
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. So it was my first job in politics. I didn't actually know what a congressperson was, what they did. I was just like, I want to get a job in politics. This sounds like a cool role. So it was actually like a few days before the interview that I was like, all right, what would I do? What is this all about? So we have two types of federal representatives from each state. We have state senators. So every state gets 2 senators. And then we have state representatives, and that could be any number of representatives from each state, but it all depends on the population, which is why it's really important to fill out the census, because the number of people that are in a population determines how the district is drawn. And how many representatives you get. So since we've grown so much, it's so important for folks to fill out the census, because we actually deserve more representatives in DC, in Congress, helping make these decisions. But if folks don't fill out the census, we don't get that accurate representation. We don't get as many votes representing us as we actually deserve. So he's one of the folks, based on population, that, like I mentioned, represents that gerrymandered looking area from North Austin all the way to San Antonio. And I was his field representative. So that's one of the roles as a congressional staffer, is just to help him, connect him to the community that he serves, because it's such a huge area, and make sure that he knows what his constituents are thinking, are feeling, what they want, how they want him to vote over in DC. And so I was his sort of field outreach person in his the top half of his district. So I would travel all the time, nights, weekends, going to different meetings from different events, parades, to HOA meetings, neighborhood association meetings, and meeting with different leaders all the way from North Austin to Lockhart to Hays County, San Marcos, Kyle Buda. And finding out who these leaders were, who the constituents were, what did they need, sort of what was going on, and being his ear on the ground and connecting them to those folks. And it was really cool, because I'd never been to an HOA meeting before. I didn't know that there were local political clubs, like local Democratic clubs or Republican clubs, that were in charge of certain things in the community. I didn't know that neighborhood associations were the ones that decided who can park on the street and who can't, and what rules happen in the area. And with South by Southwest, a lot of these neighborhood associations or HOAs decide what bands are allowed to play near them and stuff.
Really?
So I was just like, what?
Wow.
That's
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and a lot of them throw down in these HOA meetings too, so they get really spicy. And I'm
like you're talking about fighting or
I'm ready. They're like, this person. Remember there was this one guy who was retired. He had all the time in the world, and he had a drone spy on his neighbor who was building a McMansion and an illegal pool and an illegal sauna room. And so he was showing us pictures, and they're, look at this McMansion, this millionaire. He's building all these things they're not supposed to. Yeah. And everybody was like, let's go after him. Let's tell our city council member. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, yeah. I didn't even live there, but I was getting into it. But I was like, oh, wow, this is how stuff happens. It starts with your neighborhood, and then you tell your city council member, and then that city council member does this, and just learning about all the different roles that local people all the way to federal people play in politics, was pretty mind-blowing. And I was lucky that, even though this was a federal government job, my specific role was working with the community. So I was able to learn what these different levels were. And that if people needed help with anything, when it comes to who can park on your street, to I filed an application for immigration and I don't know what to do now, that those are different offices, those are different levels, and there's someone there every step of the way that's supposed to help you. We elect these representatives to work for us, and we need to hold them accountable.
So it is effective at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, I was actually going to ask you, Kris, about the word politics and the weight that it has from my perspective in society. But I also think that you answered that question with what would surprise you in politics so far. And you just hit it with just kind of telling us about all the travel and the different things that was going on during these things. So if you want to expound on that, if you want to, you can. But you pretty much knocked that question out of the water.
I mean, there are so many things that surprise me. I think the fact that, I don't think people know who their congressman is, who their representative is. And I don't think people know that, a lot of people see petitions. A lot of people see, graphics online of call your representative if you want this thing done, whatever. But how many people actually do that, right? You see it, you're like, yeah, people should call them. But are you calling them?
What does that call look like?
Yeah, exactly. So every office has a bunch of interns and staff members that work together to answer the calls and to try to field them to see if this office can help them. For example, if it's an opinion. So our office I was surprised that we actually take these calls. I don't know why. I just assumed, I'll call and probably leave a message. Nobody will listen to me, right? Because prior to having this job, I thought I didn't really care about politics, to be honest, because I didn't see myself reflected in it. And so I thought, they don't care about me. They don't look like me. They don't come from where I come from. Why would they care about me, But I was surprised to see that there are people that actually take these calls and that record them. And that a lot of these opinions on, like, for example, people could call in to say, that vote you took in D.C. last week, I didn't agree with it. I didn't like it. Or, hey, this one bill's coming up. I want you to vote this way. Or, I actually care about this. Can you do something about this one issue in your community? We take those notes down and we send them to our policy people in D.C. and they look at it. And we closely monitor what are the people saying in our community. Like, oh, man, a lot of them are calling about this. So if a ton of people call one number about a specific issue,
it makes a difference.
It makes a difference. They listen. They're like, oh, man, like, it annoys them. And so it was really exciting to see that, to like, no, we should be calling our representatives. We should be annoying them because they're like, dang, these calls aren't going to stop until we do something. Yeah. So I think a lot of people don't know that whenever, offices get so many of these calls, they think like, okay, so I have to do something about this. If it's either releasing a statement or working with the local other representatives in my area, how do we figure this out?
Yeah.
Because it's their job. What else are they doing? They have to listen to, what's happening because they want to get reelected. And if people are upset, if people don't feel like they're heard, they're not going to get reelected. And so I think we have to realize that, us holding them accountable is so important because they want our support when it comes to reelection time. Yeah. And whenever we do make those calls and our voices aren't heard, our requests aren't heard, we can show them how we feel about that come next election.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super powerful. So how I've heard that, I know that my own voting registration story was kind of unique and a lot of user error, but I have heard that registering in Texas is pretty difficult. It's actually more difficult than a lot of other cities in the nation. So why is that? And what is kind of that ratio between Texas and other states?
Yeah. So, for example, there are other states where you could, register to vote online, register or vote by mail. And in Texas, it's sort of any obstacle they can put in front of you, they're going to put in front of you. And I'll be honest, I, lean more left, more progressive. And so I've seen that because this state leans a lot more, the folks in charge lean a lot more conservative and Republican, and they see that a lot of younger folks, a lot of Black, Indigenous people of color are leaning more progressive, more left. This state can become what they say, it's purple right now, it can turn blue. So they're like, what can we do to stop that from happening? Any obstacle we could put in their way, let's do it. Right now there's a pandemic. They could vote by mail. People could do a lot of stuff online. No, let's make it harder, because we need to win these elections. Whatever we can do to win an election, let's do it. At this time, there are a lot of states that, already there are a lot of states where you can vote by mail. And then at this time, there are states that are changing their rules so that folks can vote by mail to protect their residents in their states.
So currently Texas has a rule saying that we cannot vote at this point. Do you think that will be changing because of the current pandemic?
Texas will not. I don't think they would decide to do it on their own. There are lawsuits in place right now. Hopefully those lawsuits could change that, especially before November. That could, and I'm not just saying that so that Texas let's turn blue, but to save lives and to save people from going to the hospital and getting sick and getting insane medical bills. And that's what's preventing a lot of people from going to the hospital, is because of those medical bills, because we have such a horrible healthcare system in Texas too that hasn't, been expanded to cover more people. But yeah, I think being made difficult to register to vote, that's not an accident. I think that's done on purpose to disenfranchise folks, to keep the state from turning blue, to have accurate representation.
That's wild.
So to piggyback off of what Kris just asked, and you've been doing an awesome job so far. Me, myself, I have a hard time understanding the language, the voting language within the propositions. This is incredibly difficult for me.
Oh, yeah.
So I can only imagine for people that don't really vote and are trying to do this now, when they actually show up to vote, they're in for a rude awakening. Can you speak to that, please? Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to understand?
Yeah, definitely. And so I think it's another tool to make it so that people aren't as informed, to keep us from voting. I think a lot of people are very scared and intimidated to vote. Like, I have to understand this language, but to know what it is. But yeah, it's another barrier. I remember thinking, or not thinking, but as a part of my job as congressional staffer doing outreach, I would go to Texas State a lot. And I love going there. I love talking to young folks about voting, about getting civically engaged. And I was talking to a classroom of students. They were all Black, Indigenous people of color. And I picked this classroom for a specific reason, to talk to them. And I said, hey, you guys, do you not care about your community? And they said, no, we do care. Do you guys not care about your families? No, we do care. Do you care about what's going on in the world? Would you want to do something to change things, to fix things? Do you not like how it's going on? They're like, yeah, that's how we feel. I was like, do you know who your local state representative is? They're like, no. Do you know who your local mayor is? They're like, no.
Wow.
Do you know who your congressman is? And that's who I'm here to talk to you about today. They're like, no. And I showed them a picture. Have you seen this guy before? Do you know who this is? No, I don't know.
Wow.
And so they do care. And this particular class I was in was an introduction to Latino studies. It's an ethnic studies course. And that was my major when I was in college. And that's what really revolutionized me, is learning my history, the history that was kept from me. One of the things that's happened on purpose is when you don't know your history, you don't know people who look like you can do really great things and that have done great things. So you'll feel disempowered. You won't see yourself, not only in politically, but in historically, you don't see people who look like you. So you don't think you can do anything. And so when I saw that not only people who look like me, people who came from my neighborhood have done great things, it makes me feel like I can do something, right? So this is why I went to this particular class. And I said, do you guys how many of you are registered to vote? And they're like, we don't even know how to do that. It's like, do you guys feel intimidated by it? So I think there's this missing bridge. It's not that young folks don't want to get involved. It's not that they don't want to vote. It's just, it's been made so difficult, and it's been done that way on purpose. And so that's why a lot of them, they don't do it. And so it's made through really cool shows like this, made from these populations that are like, you know what, you don't know how to do it. a program like this is really revolutionary. It's like, let me take this complicated stuff and simplify it for you so that you can do it. That's why I'm really excited to be on here and to talk about these things, because if folks who are trying to keep us from voting, keep us from being civically engaged, won't give us this information, we'll educate ourselves and we'll take over.
Right on.
That was powerful.
Right on.
That was so powerful.
That was so awesome.
I got some goosies. That's awesome. Well, wow. So it's kind of like a really great transition into kind of where we want to go, because me and Raasin and I are really about content, and we're about how powerful content is. And especially, when you're learning something, it's really hard to learn when it's not as visually appealing, or it's not in a verbiage that it's simple enough, right? So we're really advocates of content in general, and really doing it in a way where it engages. I always say there's two types of content. It either encourages or it discourages, right? So what role do you think that plays in politics specifically, that is kind of known for being really dry? So what role do you think media and content in general have in politics?
Yeah, I think especially right now, media, especially media like this, is so powerful and could help be a part of, revolutionizing politics, and that it simplifies it. Because as I mentioned, it's so complicated, and it's done that way on purpose. And so, for example, I feel like I'm not a youth anymore because I don't understand TikTok. And a lot of really young people are getting on TikTok in a really revolutionary way, in that they are spreading messages on abortion access, on what representatives are doing or not doing. We had an intern for the organization I work for, Progress Texas, do a TikTok on how to become a poll worker, and how they want young people to be poll workers right now because they're less at risk for coronavirus, and that they can get paid doing it too. And she made a cute little TikTok pointing to things. I was like, wow, that's so cool. That's so revolutionary. And young people are going to see it.
And it's so accessible.
Yes.
Yes. So that gives it power.
Yeah. Whereas you could say it could be written in like 5 long paragraphs in a very like dry, dull way. And if you see that, you're like, oh, I don't want to read that. I don't know about it. But if you make a cool TikTok video, like, that's revolutionary. Another revolutionary thing too is making media with people who like look like you. Like if you're trying to reach a certain audience, have that media have folks who look like that audience too, speaking to those people in that language with that perspective.
That's so powerful, Kris. I just
so powerful. All of it.
I just understanding that our vision for all of this that we're doing, because it's people of color that's in front of the cameras, it's just what she just said. It's so powerful when people see that. So I think that we're on the right track when we're doing stuff like this. So I think media, and the content that we produce, it'll be impactful in the long run. Am I doing this correct?
Yeah, let's skip a couple questions actually, because let's go.
What are we on time?
5 minutes.
Yeah, let's go to you take this one, because I think this is super important, and then
Where, Kris? What is
this one.
voter suppression?
Yeah. Let's talk about voter suppression, and then wrap it up after that. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
Awesome. It's a good thing this is edited.
Sound good? All right.
Yeah. Good.
So could you speak a little bit to really what is voter suppression, and also what are some like maybe common examples? Because I'm kind of like eager to hear that, because that term doesn't really come in my my conversation a lot. So could you speak to that?
Yeah. So I couldn't give like the Webster's dictionary definition of voter suppression,
but your
I could give, for sure. And I could give a lot of examples as well. But basically it's a historical way to keep Black, Indigenous people of color, young folks from voting. And it can vary from, and one example is in Austin, less access to places to vote on the east side versus the west side. In Austin, the fact that on the east side, the polls are open for a shorter time than they are on the west side. making polls inaccessible to people. Texas was trying to pass a voter ID law. Things that are like, well, you have to bring certain things to vote. Voter suppression are all these extra things, extra barriers to keep folks from voting. A lot of stuff is happening right now with elections in different states. For example, I think Kentucky was taking away a lot of polling locations and saying, oh, because of concerns for coronavirus, we're going to close all these locations and only have a few available. But that wouldn't make sense because now more people are going to go to these few locations that are available. And so more people are going to be around more people are going to expose. And if a state did care about the concern for coronavirus, you wouldn't even have had people show up to the election that day. You would have to have had them allow them to vote by mail. Mm-hmm. Right. And so any way to make it seem a certain way to manipulate votes. And it's undemocratic, it's unpatriotic, it's un-American.
It's not right.
It's not right. Yeah.
It's not right.
It's not right.
It's not right. Making another form of voter suppression could be too, talking about making the language complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, like, I don't understand this. And I think what a lot of folks don't know, which I found so fascinating, is that there are a lot of lawmakers, a lot of city council members that they don't understand that language either.
Wow.
But they have all these staff members that help them. They have the support team that reads the stuff through them and tells them, hey, here's how you vote. This is what this means. They're like, okay, cool.
Wow.
And so I think that's another reason, too, why a lot of folks don't think, oh, I couldn't get involved in politics. I couldn't run for this. I couldn't run for that because I don't know all that fancy language. You, by being from that town, by having that lived experience, know way more about these issues than this other politician in that seat right now.
Otherwise wouldn't be from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All those fancy words, that's just a barrier. That's not what that seat's about, is knowing all that language. That's not what that's about. There are people that'll be there, that'll support you, that'll help you. Your community will be there and support you and let you know how they want you to vote because you represent them. You don't need to know all that fancy language.
Man, I wish you could just mic drop right now. That was beautiful.
Mind blown.
So good. Oh man, well, I think that is a lot, Diana. Thank you. You've amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna piggyback off Kris. My mind is blown. You have knocked this out of the park, and I know people that are watching now have really benefited from hearing your voice today.